In the shadow of the Black Death, a single silver pound could change a peasant's life forever. But to hold that coin, you had to survive 150 days of back-breaking, uninterrupted field labor under the scorching sun. If you got sick, you starved. If you stopped, you were whipped. If your back gave out, and it always gave out, you were replaced by the next desperate soul waiting at the edge of the field. The question that haunts every surviving record is this: was a pound of silver worth a pound of flesh? Stick around, because we're about to do the math on human endurance, medieval economics, and exactly how much suffering a landlord was willing to pay for. The year is 1315. Great Britain is in the grip of a famine so severe that some villages lose half their population. In the fields of Northamptonshire, a man named John lifts his hoe for the 1000th time that week. His hands are cracked and bleeding, his back is a knot of screaming muscle, his stomach empty. John is a labourer. He owns nothing, not the land he works, not the tools in his hands, not the grain he's harvesting. He rents his life by the day, and today he's earning a penny and a half. Tomorrow, if he's lucky, he'll earn the same. If he works 150 days without fail, no illness, no rain, no injury, no holy day, he might just earn 1 silver pound. 1 pound, the currency that could buy a cow or a year's supply of bread, or, if he dreams, a plot of land so small he'd still starve on it, but at least he'd starve on his own dirt. For the landlord watching from the manor house, that pound is a rounding error. For John, it is survival itself. But here's the dark truth about medieval labour that textbooks gloss over. John's 150 days of work didn't just build his landlord's wealth, they built the entire economic engine of feudal England. And they were never fair, they were never kind, they were arithmetic with a whip behind it. Let's begin with the most basic question. What was a pound in the 1300s? A pound sterling was 240 silver pennies. Not paper, not numbers on a screen, actual silver. Each penny weighed about 1.3 grams of sterling-grade silver. A pound meant you were holding nearly a pound of the stuff, about 350 grams. That's the weight of a small apple in silver. To a medieval peasant, that apple represented years of life. But a pound wasn't just a coin, it was a unit of account. The crown used it to calculate taxes, landlords used it to calculate rents, merchants used it to calculate trade, and peasants, poor John with his bleeding hands, used it to calculate the distance between survival and death. In 1300, a pound could buy you a cow, roughly 6 to 8 shillings, 72 to 96 pence. That's about half a pound. A horse, about 15 shillings, 180 pence. A quarter of wheat, enough to feed a family for 3 months, cost about 4 to 5 shillings, 48 to 60 pence. A tunic, 2 shillings, 24 pence. A year's rent for a peasant's cottage, 1 to 2 shillings, 12 to 24 pence. So a pound, that single silver coin, could buy a horse, or 2 cows, or a year's worth of wheat, or a whole decade of rent. To a labourer earning a penny and a half per day, that pound represented 150 days of work. But to a lord whose annual income was hundreds of pounds, it was trivial. This was the fundamental injustice of the medieval economy. The people who did all the work earned almost nothing. The people who owned everything earned almost everything, and the system was designed to keep it that way. Let's look at the arithmetic more closely. In 1300, an unskilled labourer earned about 1.5 pence per day. That's the same wage John earned. A skilled craftsman, a mason, a carpenter, a blacksmith, might earn 3 pence per day. But John wasn't skilled. He was a pair of hands and a strong back. His value to the landlord was his capacity for physical suffering. John worked from sunrise to sunset. In the summer, that's about 16 hours. In the winter, maybe 8. But the landlord didn't pay by the hour, he paid by the day, and he expected every single hour to be filled with labour. No breaks, no sitting, no resting. If John sat down to wipe his brow, the reeve, the landlord's enforcer, would be there with a whip. If John stopped to drink water, the reeve would dock his pay. The work itself was brutal. Ploughing, using a wooden plough pulled by oxen, required strength that no modern person can fully imagine. Turning over heavy clay soil hour after hour, step aching step. The oxen was slow, the work was monotonous, and it never ended. Harvesting was even worse. The scythe was heavy, the wheat was sharp. John's hands would be cut 100 times a day. His back would be bent for hours, and if he cut himself badly enough to bleed on the crop, well, the reeve would dock his pay for that too. Then came threshing, beating the grain from the husks with a flail, a tool that weighed several pounds and had to be swung over and over and over. 8 hours of threshing produced maybe a bushel of grain. A bushel weighed about 56 pounds. John earned a fraction of a penny for every bushel, and the landlord took the rest. This was the normal. This was what John had been born into. His father had done it, his grandfather had done it, his children would do it. The system was older than memory, older than law, older than the kingdom itself. The land belonged to the Lord protected the peasants, in return the peasants worked the land. It was simple, it was brutal, and it was absolute. But here's the catch, the normal was about to shatter, because in 1315 the rains came and the famine began, and by 1348 the plague would arrive, and with it the greatest economic disruption the medieval world had ever seen.
Let's stay with John for a moment. His life is a ledger of small transactions. Every day he earns 1.5 pence. Every week he might earn 9 pence if he works all 6 days and the landlord doesn't deduct for any reason. Every month 36 pence or 3 shillings. Every year, if he's perfect, he earns about 438 pence, roughly £1 and 16 shillings. But here's what that ledger doesn't show. The deductions. If John needs to use the Lord's mill to grind his grain, he pays a fee, a portion of his flour. If he needs firewood from the Lord's forest, he pays a fee. If his wife wants to sell eggs at the market, she pays a toll. If his daughter gets married, she pays a fine. If his son dies without an heir, the Lord takes back the cottage. Every transaction in John's life was taxed, and every tax pushed him further from that silver pound. Let's get more specific. In 1300, the average peasant family consumed about 1,200 pounds of grain per year. That's about 2 quarters of wheat. To produce that grain, John had to work roughly 150 days, the same number of days that earned him his silver pound. In other words, he spent half his working year just feeding himself and his family. The other half, that went to the Lord, as rent, as tax, as tithe. So John's 150 days of work for £1, that wasn't his wage, that was his net income, after he'd fed himself, after he'd paid his rent, after he'd paid his taxes, after every deduction. The pound in his pocket was what remained, assuming anything remained at all. And here's the thing about those deductions, they were unpredictable. In 1315, the Great Famine struck. The rains failed, the crops rotted in the fields, the price of grain quadrupled overnight. Suddenly, John's 1.5 pence per day couldn't buy enough bread to keep his family alive. He had to borrow, he had to beg, he had to sell his tools, his clothes, his cow. By the end of the famine, half of England's peasants were dead. Those who survived were lucky, but they were also desperate, and desperation is what made the 1340s so dangerous for the landlords. Enter the Black Death, 1348. The plague swept through England, killing between a third and a half of the population. In some villages, everyone died. In others, only a few survived. The dead were piled in pits. The living, well, they were suddenly very valuable, because when the population drops by half, the number of workers drops by half, but the land doesn't go anywhere. The crops still need harvesting, the fields still need ploughing, the lords still need their rents, and suddenly the workers who survived could name their price. Let's read the numbers. In 1349, immediately after the plague, wages for labourers doubled. A man who had earned 1.5 pence per day was now earning 3. Some earned 4. Some, the most skilled, the strongest, the luckiest, earned as much as 6 pence per day. John's 150 days of work, which used to earn him a silver pound, now earned him £3. He could buy a horse, he could buy a cow, he could pay his rent and still have something left over. For the first time in his life, John had choices. But the landlords didn't like that, because John's choices threatened the entire feudal order. If John could earn enough to buy a small plot of land, he might leave the manor altogether. If John could demand higher wages, he might stop working for the lord entirely. If John had savings, he might stop being grateful, and a grateful peasant is a docile peasant. A grateful peasant doesn't revolt. The lords were terrified, and they had a solution: legislation. But the solution they chose wasn't just about wages, it was about control, and the length the crown would go to keep the poor in their place would shock you.
The Statute of Labourers, 1351. Let's read the text carefully, because it's one of the most remarkable documents in English history. The statute declared, "Whereas great part of the people, and especially of the workmen and servants, have died in the pestilence, many, seeing the necessity of the great lords, will serve only if they receive double wages. The lords ought to have the service of their servants as it was due in times past." In plain English, the lords were scared that workers were asking for too much, so the crown stepped in to cap wages at pre-plague levels. That meant John's daily wage, the 1.5 pence he'd earned in 1300, was now the legal maximum. No matter how scarce labour was, no matter how desperate the landlords were, John couldn't legally earn more than 1.5 pence. But here's where it gets even darker. The statute didn't just cap wages, it required every able-bodied person under the age of 60 to accept work at those wages. If John refused an offer of work, he could be imprisoned. If he accepted work but quit before his contract was up, he could be branded. If he travelled to find better work, he could be whipped. And the landlords didn't just accept the law, they pushed back. They imposed fines. They demanded extra labour services, the infamous boon days, where peasants had to work for free on the lord's land. They manipulated the courts. They did everything in their power to keep wages low and control tight. But the plague had broken something in the medieval system. The old certainties that there were always more workers, that the workers could always be controlled, that the lord's authority was absolute, those certainties were gone, and they were never coming back. The Statute of 1351 didn't stop the economic revolution, it accelerated it. Because when you criminalise a people's struggle for survival, you don't make them docile, you make them angry. And angry peasants, well, that's how revolts start.
The Statute of Labourers was renewed, revised and reinforced for decades, but it couldn't hold back the tide. By 1381, the peasants had had enough. The peasants' revolt that year was not just about taxes, it was about everything: wages, rents, freedom, dignity. The rebels marched on London, burned the Savoy Palace, and demanded the abolition of serfdom. They wanted the right to choose their employers. They wanted the right to earn fair wages. They wanted the right to be treated like human beings. And although the revolt was crushed, its memory lived on. The idea that peasants had rights, that they could fight for their own dignity, that idea didn't die in 1381. It grew, it spread, and eventually, over the next 2 centuries, serfdom was abolished in England.
not because the lords became kind, but because the peasants made themselves too expensive to control. The economics of labor, the 150 days of hell for a silver pound, had changed forever. But let's bring this into the present. How many days of work does it take to earn a pound of silver today? In modern terms, a pound of silver is worth roughly £200, about the price of a decent used bicycle. If the average UK worker earns £15 per hour, that's about 13 hours of work. For an American minimum wage worker, it's about 30 hours. For a tech worker, it's 4 hours. In the 1300s, it took 150 days of back-breaking labor to earn the same amount. That's the distance we've traveled. That's the progress we've made. But progress has always kept pace with productivity, because the rich have always found ways to keep more, because the fight between the people who work and the people who own has never ended. It's just changed form. Instead of whips, we have zero-hour contracts. Instead of stocks, we have gig economy lawsuits. Instead of the Statute of Labourers, we have minimum wage debates. The fundamental question, how much is a day of human labor worth, is still being fought in parliaments, boardrooms, and living rooms, and the answer is still contested, because the lords of the 21st century, the corporations, the billionaires, the hedge funds, they still want to pay as little as possible for as much work as possible, and the workers still want to survive. John's 150 days for a silver pound is a parable for our times. It's a reminder that the value of human labor is not determined by nature, it's determined by power, and power is always up for grabs. 150 days of suffering for a single coin, and that coin couldn't buy freedom, only survival. But the memory of that struggle, that's the real legacy. If you want more deep dives into the real economics of the medieval world, subscribe to the Medieval Ledger, where we turn ledgers into stories and class gaps into history.